You know, life has a strange way of convincing you that everything is perfect right before it delivers a harsh dose of reality. I'm Daniel, 36, and I've been carving out a decent life for myself as a software engineer. Or at least, that's what I thought. I had a stable job, a house to call my own, and until recently, I would have described my marriage as happy. I suppose everyone begins these kinds of stories believing they have it all figured out. My experience was no exception. I first crossed paths with Sophie about 6 years ago at a tech law conference where I was giving a talk. She's a lawyer, sharp as a tack. Honestly, I was no match for her keen intellect. The moment I laid eyes on her, I was captivated. The confidence she exuded, the way she commanded attention with her words, was something else. It was honestly a bit intimidating, but in the best possible way. She represented everything I thought I wanted in a partner: smart, ambitious, and stunning. When we began dating, it felt like we were this dynamic duo. You know the type. Her excelling in her career, me doing well in mine. We just clicked. I felt fortunate, or so I believed. Fast forward 5 years into our marriage, and life seemed steady. I loathe that word now. We were living what many would refer to as the dream: good jobs, decent income, and a baby on the way. Sophie was 8 months pregnant, and we were checking off all the boxes that come with expecting your first child. I can still vividly recall setting up the nursery together, discussing baby names, and laughing about how we'd cope with sleepless nights. When the baby arrived, I was genuinely thrilled at the prospect of being a dad. You know, all the typical family man stuff. But here's the kicker. Sometimes, life's most significant warning signs manifest in the smallest moments. I started to notice Sophie behaving differently, becoming more distant. She spent an increasing amount of time glued to her phone, and whenever I inquired about who she was chatting with, she would just smile and brush it off. Pregnancy nerves, she would say, as if that explained everything. I wanted to believe her. I really did. I wanted to convince myself that she was merely stressed about the baby and that our relationship was fine. Yet, deep down, something felt off. One evening, I broached the subject casually, hoping to ease my mind. We were lounging on the couch, and she was scrolling through her phone as usual. "Hey, you've been going out quite a bit lately," I said, trying not to sound accusatory, just genuinely curious. "Everything okay?" She looked up at me with that smile, the one I used to adore, but now it just makes me furious when I think about it. "Oh, it's just pregnancy stuff," she replied nonchalantly. "I get anxious, and seeing friends helps." It was like she thought that made everything okay. I let it slide, convinced I was simply being paranoid, but that feeling gnawed at me. I think that's where it all began to unravel, even if I didn't realize it at the time. It's astonishing how blind you can be to the signs, all because you tell yourself everything is all right, as the alternative, the painful truth, is just too hard to confront. We carried on with our lives, pretending everything was perfectly normal, and I managed to convince myself that I was just overthinking things. After all, who would mess around when they were 8 months pregnant, right? But looking back now, it's clear that all the pieces were there, like a puzzle I was too unwilling to solve. She'd be out late, meeting friends more often than she should have, and glued to her phone, always with some excuse. I suppose I just didn't want to accept it. I was too fixated on the future we were supposed to have together. Me, her, and the baby. The truth is, when you're that invested in someone, you often don't notice the cracks forming until it's far too late. Trust me, those cracks were just waiting to shatter everything. You know how they say life can change in an instant? That's precisely what happened to me. It was an ordinary Saturday evening, just another weekend like any other. Sophie mentioned she was meeting an old friend, someone she hadn't seen in years, as she put it. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? We had our routines, our lives, and I had no reason to suspect anything amiss at that moment. So, like the trusting fool I was, I wished her a good time and stayed home. She even kissed me goodbye as she left, as if everything was perfectly fine. Now, reflecting on it, I'm infuriated with myself for missing those small signals. With the house all to myself, I figured I'd get some work done. I'm the type of guy who can lose himself in a project, especially when things are quiet. A few hours passed, and I realized we were running low on groceries. Knowing Sophie wouldn't be back for a while, I decided to head out and pick up a few things from the store. Harmless enough, right? As I drove down the road, I wasn't thinking about much, just the usual errands for the week ahead. Then, out of nowhere, I spotted her car. It was parked near a cozy little cafe tucked away on a side street. At first, my heart didn't even skip a beat. I knew Sophie had gone out, so it made sense for her car to be there. After all, she was meeting a friend, right? But as I got closer, something felt off. An inexplicable unease settled in my stomach. You know that feeling, the one that tells you something is amiss, even when you lack all the details. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself I was just being paranoid. But as I approached, I saw her sitting in the driver's seat. She wasn't alone. There was a man in the passenger seat, someone I didn't recognize. I thought maybe it was that old friend she had mentioned. Sophie knew a lot of people, and I wasn't one to question every little detail. But the way they were leaning toward each other, how close they appeared, it just didn't sit right with me. And then it happened. In a moment that seared into my memory, I watched in disbelief as Sophie leaned over and started performing oral sex on him right there in our car, in plain view of the public. It was as if the entire world around them ceased to exist. I can hardly describe the whirlwind of emotions that surged through me at that moment. Everything inside me felt like it snapped all at once. I couldn't wrap my head around what I was witnessing. The woman I had spent the last 6 years of my life with, the mother of my unborn child, was in that car with some random guy, and it hit me like a freight train. I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot, staring at the scene unfolding before me as if it were happening in slow motion. My brain struggled to process what my eyes were witnessing, but when it finally caught up, I lost all control. A surge of rage, unlike anything I had ever felt, erupted within me before I even knew what I was doing. I parked the car and stormed toward them without a second thought. I didn't even have a plan. I just wanted it to stop. I needed to erase the horror I had just seen, to make the pain vanish. I yanked open the car door, and without hesitation, I let loose on him, my fists flying, landing punch after punch. I didn't care who he was or what the consequences might be. All I wanted was to inflict pain on him. Maybe a part of me wanted to hurt her too, but I couldn't bring myself to do that. The look of shock on her face was burned into my memory, and honestly, I didn't even register the screams until much later. I was solely focused on putting an end to the nightmare my life had suddenly become. I think I heard her scream for me to stop. Or maybe I didn't. It's hard to remember. Everything was a blur except for the overwhelming feelings of pain, anger, and betrayal that engulfed me. I didn't cease my assault until I felt someone tugging me away from him. It all happened so quickly, yet it felt like an eternity. That's when I heard the sirens. The sirens. God, even now, I can still hear them cutting through the rage, through the chaos I had created. I hadn't even realized how badly things had spiraled out of control until I felt hands grabbing me. I turned around to find 2 police officers standing there. They must have witnessed the entire incident because I didn't even get a chance to explain myself. Not that I had any explanation. I was still in shock, grappling with what I had just seen. The guy, Sophie's whatever he was, looked like hell. My fists had done their job well. He was bleeding from his nose and mouth, raising his hands as if he were the victim in all this. Maybe in the eyes of the law, he was, but in my eyes, he deserved every damn punch. "Sir, back off!" One of the officers shouted at me, his hand hovering over his gun as if I were some kind of threat. I suppose to them, I was. They wasted no time. Before I could even process what was happening, I was cuffed and tossed into the back of a police car. As they shoved me into the seat, I caught one last look at Sophie. She remained in the car, frozen in disbelief, as if she couldn't comprehend the gravity of the situation. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but the words just wouldn't come. Not at that moment. All I felt was an overwhelming numbness, like my brain had switched off, refusing to confront the harsh reality in front of me. The ride to the station was a blur. The entire time, I replayed that horrific scene in my mind over and over again. My wife, my pregnant wife, engaging in something so intimate with some stranger while I beat the hell out of him like a lunatic. How the hell had things gotten to this point? Where had I gone wrong? Sitting alone in the holding cell, The reality finally crashed down on me. My life was shattered. Everything I thought I knew, everything I believed in, turned out to be a cruel joke. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I understood better than anyone, had betrayed me in the most vile way imaginable. I felt physically ill. The anger still simmered beneath the surface, but now it was intertwined with a profound sadness. Loss, that's what it felt like. Like I'd lost everything in one single night. I have no idea how long I sat there, staring at the walls, desperately trying to make sense of it all. Time seemed irrelevant. Nothing mattered anymore. Eventually, the door swung open, and there she was, Sophie. Tears streamed down her face, her makeup a mess from crying. But I felt nothing. I wasn't swayed by her tears, nor by the look of remorse she tried to muster. She was always a talented actress when she wanted to be, but this time I saw right through it. Or maybe I just didn't care anymore. "Daniel, please," she sobbed, stepping toward me as if she wanted to hug me. I recoiled, not wanting her anywhere near me. Just seeing her made my stomach churn. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking," she pleaded. I wanted to laugh, a bitter laugh. "You don't know what you were thinking?" Those were her words after everything I had just witnessed, after the humiliation and betrayal. But I didn't laugh. I merely stared at her, my fists clenched at my sides, fighting to contain the storm of emotions that threatened to tear me apart. "It was a mistake, I swear," she continued, her voice shaking as if she were the one who had been wronged. "I don't know what came over me. It was the stress, the pregnancy. I wasn't in my right mind. Please, Daniel, you have to believe me." Believe her? After what I had just seen? I could still vividly picture it. Her with that man, doing something that was supposed to be intimate between us, between a husband and wife. And she expected me to believe it was just stress and that she wasn't in her right mind. Bullshit. You weren't in your right mind, Sophie. You were in that car. You chose to do that. Don't even try to pin this on the pregnancy. Don't you dare. She flinched at my words, her tears flowing even harder now, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I was done playing the fool. "I love you," she whispered, stepping closer once more. "I made a mistake, but that doesn't change the fact that I love you. Please, Daniel, we can fix this. We can work through it. Don't throw everything away." I felt like I was losing my mind. How could she stand there after what she had done and talk about love? About fixing things? Did she honestly think I was that weak? That oblivious? Did she truly believe I could just wipe the memory of what I'd witnessed from my mind and revert to the way things were? "Fix this," I echoed, my voice trembling with disbelief. "How do you fix that, Sophie? How do you fix witnessing your wife with another man, doing that?" She stood there, speechless, tears streaming down her face, and all she could offer were desperate pleas and excuses. Every word she spoke only fueled my rage further. She insisted it was a one-time mistake, that she had no idea why she did it. But I wasn't buying it anymore. "Daniel, please. We have a baby on the way. You can't just leave us. I need you. We need you." There was the emotional manipulation. She wielded the pregnancy like a weapon, as if the fact that she was carrying our child somehow meant I had to forgive her. As if I owed her another chance because of the life growing inside her. But all I could think about was whether that baby was even mine. After what I saw, how could I trust anything? "I'm getting a DNA test," I stated flatly, each word feeling like a death sentence. "And if that baby isn't mine, we're finished. Do you understand, Sophie? We're done." Her complexion drained of color. She hadn't expected that. Honestly, neither had I. But it was the truth. I couldn't move forward without knowing. If that child wasn't mine, there would be no way back. "Daniel, no, please," she pleaded, reaching out toward me, but I stepped back once more. I couldn't bear to be near her. Not after everything. It was a mistake. "You don't understand." "Stop," I interrupted, my voice frigid. "I understand more than you think, Sophie. I'm done." I turned my back on her, ignoring her sobs and the way she crumpled into a chair, still begging for my forgiveness. In that moment, a realization washed over me. It didn't matter how many excuses she made or how many times she cried or pleaded. The trust was shattered. And without trust, there was nothing left. I left the police station that night, unable to shake the image of Sophie, broken and crying, begging me to stay. But it didn't matter. Her tears, her apologies, her justifications, they meant nothing to me now. I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into staying. Not with her lies, and certainly not with the pregnancy. The drive home felt surreal, like I was in a dream I couldn't wake up from. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Anger simmered just beneath the surface, but more than that, I felt a deep, gnawing pain. It felt as if a piece of me had been violently ripped away and tossed aside. I had trusted her. I had given her everything. And in return, she had betrayed me in the most horrifying way. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a few moments, staring at the house, the one we had chosen together, where we had envisioned raising our child. Now it felt like nothing more than a hollow shell, a painful reminder of a life that was no longer mine. I couldn't bring myself to step inside. Walking through that door would mean accepting this grim, new reality that everything I thought I had was gone. Eventually, I forced myself to leave the car. As I stepped into the house, the silence enveloped me like a shroud. No laughter, no warmth, just an oppressive quiet. I stood in the doorway, taking in the life we had built together, and for the first time, I felt utterly alone. Anger surged up within me, and before I knew it, I had hurled my keys across the room. They clattered against the wall, but even that noise felt empty. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to unleash all the rage that had been building inside me. But instead, I just stood there, breathing heavily, wrestling with the storm of emotions raging within me. I couldn't remain in that house, not tonight. I grabbed a bag and stuffed it with clothes, not caring about what I took. I needed to escape, to clear my head. I refused to let her get to me. I wouldn't allow her to use the baby as a pawn to keep me in her life. Not after what she had done. As I drove to my friend Connor's place, her words echoed in my mind. Her pleas, her desperate attempts to justify her actions. How dare she blame the pregnancy, as if that could excuse the betrayal I had witnessed. As if the stress of carrying our child somehow made her infidelity acceptable. It made my stomach churn. Connor was the only person I could think to call. He had been my closest friend for years, and if anyone could help me navigate this chaos, it was him. I wasn't looking for pity. I didn't need someone to pat me on the back and assure me that everything would be okay. I needed someone who could help me figure out what I was supposed to do next. When I arrived at his place, it was late, but he didn't hesitate to let me in. One glance at my face, and he could tell something was seriously wrong. "Man, what the hell happened?" he asked, his voice laced with concern as he led me into the living room. I sank into his couch, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I hadn't even begun to process half of it, but the words tumbled out. I recounted the horror of catching Sophie with that guy, the fight, the arrest, her feeble excuses. By the time I finished, I could barely breathe, as if I had been holding everything in for far too long. Now that I was finally letting it out, it felt like the floodgates had opened. Connor sat there in silence for a moment, absorbing what I had said. Then he shook his head, letting out a low whistle. "Jesus, Daniel, I don't even know what to say. That's messed up." "Yeah," I muttered, rubbing my hands over my face in frustration. I don't know what to do, man. She's using the baby to guilt me into staying, but I can't. I can't do this." "You can't stay," he agreed, leaning back in his chair. "You can't trust her anymore. And without trust, what's left? Nothing." "There's nothing left," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We sat in silence, the gravity of the situation pressing down on us. Connor was never one to sugarcoat things, and that's exactly what I needed. I wanted the unvarnished truth, no matter how much it hurt. "You need to get a DNA test," he finally said, breaking the heavy stillness. "You have to find out if that baby is even yours." The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. Sure, I had already mulled it over, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. The prospect that the child I had eagerly anticipated raising, the one I had dreamed of holding in my arms, might not be mine was nearly unbearable. "I know," I admitted quietly. "I told her I won't stay until I have answers. And if the baby isn't yours, He probed gently, his tone suggesting he already understood my answer. Then I'm done. I'm divorcing her. Connor nodded slowly, letting the words sink in, but remained silent for a moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer. Daniel, I know this is hell for you, but whatever happens, you'll get through it. If that baby is yours, we'll figure it out together. I wanted to cling to his words, to believe that I would somehow emerge from this turmoil intact. But all I felt at that moment was the crushing weight of betrayal and uncertainty. My world had been turned upside down, and I had no idea what the future held. The following days were a blur. I stayed at Connor's place, going through the motions of life without really living, barely eating, hardly sleeping, just waiting for the DNA test results. I cut off all communication with Sophie. She called incessantly, leaving a barrage of voicemails, but I ignored every one. I couldn't deal with her right now. Not until I had the truth. Each time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted. I was just waiting for that one call. The call that would determine whether my life would shatter completely or if there was still a thread of normalcy left. Then, the dreaded call came. I'll never forget that day. The day my worst fears were confirmed. You think you're ready for it, mentally and emotionally. You convince yourself that after all the sleepless nights and relentless replaying of those dreadful memories, along with the weeks of silence between you and your wife, you'll be able to face whatever truth they deliver. But when it finally arrives, it hits you like a freight train, breaking you in ways you can't possibly anticipate. The call came early one morning. I was still at Connor's, barely functioning. We had been waiting for what felt like an eternity. The DNA test results were supposed to come in any day now. But every passing hour felt like an eternity in itself. I thought I was ready for whatever news awaited me, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. When my phone rang, I stared at it, my heart racing in my chest. This was it, the moment everything would change again. Connor was still asleep, and I didn't want to wake him. I took the call in the small, quiet kitchen, struggling to catch my breath. As the lab technician's voice came through, it sounded calm and detached, as if they were delivering any routine piece of information. To them, this was just another job. But to me, this was my entire life. Mr. Daniel, the voice began, and I managed a response, though my words were choked like I had been screaming into the void. The DNA test results are in. Unfortunately, the results indicate that you are not the biological father of the child. That was it. A simple, cold statement. It was clinical, devoid of emotion. They couldn't have known that those words were like a wrecking ball smashing through the remnants of my already fragile existence. I fell silent. I couldn't speak. The phone slipped from my grip, hitting the floor with a dull thud. I just stood there, staring into space, the words echoing in my mind. Not the father. Not the father. Not the father. It felt as if the ground had been pulled out from beneath me. Everything I had envisioned, the excitement, the dreams, the hopes, vanished in an instant. In that moment, I didn't feel anger. Instead, a profound sadness engulfed me. I felt hollow, as if a part of me had been violently stripped away, leaving only an empty shell behind. I don't know how long I stood there, minutes, hours. Time lost all meaning. Eventually, Connor emerged from his room, sleep still evident in his eyes. The moment he saw me, his expression shifted from groggy concern to alarm. "Daniel," he said quietly, moving closer. I shook my head, unable to voice the reality that hung in the air. Connor didn't press me for details. He simply stood there, waiting for me to find the words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I managed to whisper, "I'm not the father." There it was, the bitter truth I had been dreading. The reality that Sophie had stolen from me, not just my trust, but my future as a father. The baby I had eagerly anticipated wasn't mine. She had betrayed me, and now I was left with nothing. Connor cursed softly under his breath and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. He didn't say anything else. Honestly, what could he say? What do you say to someone whose life has just crumbled into dust? After the shock faded, anger surged back, hot and sharp, slicing through the numbness like a knife. I grabbed my phone and finally listened to the voicemail Sophie had left over the past few days. Until now, I had avoided listening to them, but now I needed to hear her voice, if only to stoke the fire igniting within me. As I pressed play, her voice filled the silence. "Daniel, please call me. I know you're angry, but we need to talk. Please, for the baby's sake." The next voicemail played. "I'm sorry." "Okay, I'm so sorry. You can't just leave us like this. I made a mistake, but we can get through this." "We have to," she insisted, her voice a mix of desperation and resolve. "For our family." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. How dare she keep referring to our family, as if I was still part of it, as if she hadn't obliterated everything that mattered. I scrolled through her voicemails, my hands shaking as I hit delete on each one. They were all the same: empty apologies, frantic pleas, hollow words. She had no idea the results yet. She had no clue that I was no longer connected to her or to that child. When she finally found out, I couldn't even begin to imagine her reaction. But honestly, I didn't care. I was done. It wasn't until later that day that I finally heard from her. The phone rang, and I recognized her frantic voice. "Daniel, did you get the test results? Please talk to me." I paused, letting her sit in her panic, letting the tension build. She deserved every ounce of discomfort she felt. "Yeah," I replied flatly, my tone void of any warmth. There was a brief silence on the other end, her breath hitching in anticipation. "Is it yours?" The question nearly made me laugh, but instead, all I felt was revulsion. How could she even ask that after everything? "No, Sophie, it's not mine." The words were icy, final. I could almost hear her gasp from the other side of the line, and I knew she hadn't expected this. She had convinced herself I would still want her, that I would stay despite all of it. "Daniel, we're done." I interrupted, my voice resolute. "I'm filing for divorce. There's nothing left to discuss." "Please," she cried, her voice cracking under the strain. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean for this to happen. We can still fix this." "Fix what, Sophie?" I shot back, incredulous. "You slept with another man, got pregnant, and now you're trying to play the victim? There's nothing to fix. It's over." She continued to sob and plead, but I had already made up my mind. I hung up the phone, and for the first time in weeks, a wave of calmness washed over me. I was finally free from her deceit, her manipulation, and from the future I had thought we were building together. That afternoon, I called my lawyer to start the divorce proceedings. No amount of tears or pleas could alter my decision. This marriage was over. The moment I hung up, I felt as though a heavy burden had been lifted from my chest. It was a strange relief, something colder and more definitive than I expected. It was the kind of peace that comes after you've made a choice that can't be undone. I was no longer Daniel the husband. I wasn't the excited father-to-be, ready to welcome a child into the world. That life had been buried beneath the wreckage Sophie had left behind. What I had now was clarity. It was finished, and there was no going back. I filed for divorce the very next morning, not even bothering to warn Sophie in advance. There was nothing left to discuss. She'd made her choices, and now I was making mine. The paperwork was straightforward enough. My lawyer, who had dealt with this countless times, reassured me that it would be a smooth process as long as we both agreed to the terms. What he hadn't anticipated was Sophie's desperation. You'd think someone caught in such a compromising situation, someone who had brought another man's child into the world, would try to end things quietly, minimizing the drama. But no, Sophie was determined to fight for what she thought was hers. Within days of my filing, the calls began. First came the voicemails, one after another, her voice frantic and pleading each time. "Daniel, please. I know you're angry, but we need to talk. We can still make this work for the baby." Every time she mentioned the baby, I reminded myself, not my baby. I didn't even bother returning her calls. There was no point. I had already checked out emotionally. When I didn't respond, she escalated her tactics. One evening, I returned to Connor's place, my sanctuary amidst the chaos, and found Sophie waiting on the front steps, her face streaked with tears. She must have driven over in a last-ditch effort to sway me, but I was too exhausted for her theatrics. "Why are you here, Sophie?" I asked, my tone flat, stripped of any patience for her games. "We need to talk, Daniel," she implored, standing up and wiping her face, as if that would somehow erase the damage she had done. "Please, we can't end it like this. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We can still be a family." "A family?" I nearly laughed. "We haven't been a family for a long time, Sophie. You destroyed that when you chose to cheat on me." Her flinch felt like a slap, but I didn't care. The truth hurt, and she needed to face it. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she cried, stepping toward me. "It was a mistake, a stupid mistake. Please don't throw everything away because of one bad choice." One bad choice. I erupted, anger bubbling to the surface again. "That wasn't just a mistake, Sophie. You betrayed me, and then you tried to lie your way out of it. You continued the affair even after I caught you. And now you're trying to use the baby, not even mine, as a bargaining chip to keep me around?" Her complexion drained, and for a fleeting moment, I could see the panic in her eyes. The realization that there was no way back from this. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling, but I had no use for apologies anymore. "I don't care, Sophie. It's over. We're done. I've already filed for divorce. The papers are in the mail, and you're going to sign them. There's nothing left to discuss." The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I could see the realization washing over her, the way her shoulders drooped, as if the weight of defeat had finally crushed her spirit. She wasn't accustomed to losing, especially not like this. Sophie had always been the one in control, the one who held all the cards. But now, that power was stripped away. For a fleeting moment, I expected her to erupt in anger or throw one last desperate tantrum to try and manipulate me into staying. Instead, she just stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks, her lips quivering with unspoken words. I felt no pity for her. In fact, I felt nothing at all. I was numb. "Fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'll sign the papers." Just like that, it was over. She turned and walked to her car, not glancing back, not uttering another word. I watched her leave, but there was no sense of victory or satisfaction. Only a hollow ache deep in my chest. Even though I was the one choosing to end it, I still couldn't wrap my mind around how we had spiraled to this point. The following weeks became a blur of paperwork and legal appointments. The divorce process unfolded quickly, a chaotic whirlwind that felt strangely liberating. True to her word, Sophie signed the papers without much resistance. Maybe she had finally realized that no amount of tears or manipulation could sway my decision. Word got around that she had moved in with the man she cheated on me with. You'd think that revelation would ignite some strong reaction. Anger, jealousy, something. But it only left me feeling hollow. I didn't return to our house after signing the divorce papers. I couldn't face it. It had ceased to be a home, morphing into a ghost of what once was, filled with memories that now felt unreal. I left it all behind for Sophie, letting her inhabit a shell of what we had shared. I was finished with it. Meanwhile, I continued to stay at Connor's place, grappling with what my life was meant to look like now. There were no dramatic confrontations or cathartic moments of closure, just a quiet acceptance that crept in when I realized I was still standing, despite everything. It wasn't easy. There were nights when the anger would resurface, keeping me awake as I replayed every detail in my mind, questioning if there had been a moment, a decision I could have made differently that might have altered the outcome. But in the end, I always reached the same conclusion. Sophie had made her choices, and now I was making mine. Severing ties wasn't merely about signing the papers and moving out. It was about relinquishing everything we had been, or everything I had thought we were. The hardest part wasn't losing her. It was letting go of the future I had envisioned. A family, a child, the life we had planned together. That was the true loss, and it took me the longest time to accept it. But slowly, painfully, I began to let it go. I cut off all communication. No more calls, no more texts. I didn't need her updates or her attempts to win me back. I didn't need anything from her anymore. The last piece of this puzzle was the house. Once the papers were finalized, I sold it without hesitation. I wanted to rid myself of any reminders of the life I was leaving behind. It was time for a fresh start, even if I wasn't entirely sure what that meant yet. By the time the sale went through, I felt as though I had finally shut the door on that chapter of my life. I was free. I wish I could say that after the divorce, everything fell into place, that I moved on effortlessly and that life improved like flipping a switch. But that's not how healing works. Even after the papers were signed and I had cut all ties with Sophie, I still carried the weight of it all. There's no quick fix for betrayal, humiliation, and rage. Those feelings linger, no matter how much you attempt to bury them. For the first few months, I operated in survival mode, going through the motions, working, keeping myself busy, and trying not to think too much. Yet, even in the midst of distraction, there were moments when everything would come crashing down. I'd find myself lost in memories, recalling her with that man, the lies she spun, the disbelief etched on her face when I told her it was over. I despised that she still held power over me, that even after all of this, she could still invade my thoughts. But time has a way of dulling the sharp edges of pain. Slowly, bit by bit, I began to feel like myself again. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in a while, immersed myself in work, and started contemplating what the next chapter of my life would look like. I wasn't ready for anything serious, but I was eager to begin living life on my own terms again. Then one day, out of the blue, I got news about Sophie. It came from a mutual friend, one of those people who somehow manages to stay connected to everyone, even when things fall apart. I hadn't asked for an update, but there it was, landing in my lap. "Hey, did you hear about Sophie?" the text read. I stared at my phone, dread pooling in my stomach. A part of me didn't want to know. I had fought hard to move on, to erase her from my life. But my curiosity won out, and before I could stop myself, I typed back, "No, what's going on?" The response came almost immediately. "She's with that guy now, the one you caught her with. But get this, he's in jail for domestic violence. Apparently, he's been beating her." I couldn't believe what I was reading. I blinked and reread the message, a whirlwind of emotions crashing over me. Anger, disgust, a dark sense of irony. But more than anything, I felt a strange relief. You'd think, after everything, I'd feel some kind of satisfaction at this news. The cliché, "what goes around comes around," flitted through my mind. Part of me thought, she deserves this. After the pain she caused me, after the betrayal and her attempts to manipulate me with the baby, she had ended up with someone even worse. In a way, it felt like poetic justice. But as I mulled it over, I realized I didn't feel good about it. There was no sense of triumph. Instead, I felt a deep well of sympathy for her. Make no mistake, what she did to me was unforgivable. She dismantled our marriage, shattered my trust, and obliterated the future we had dreamed of together. But no one should have to endure a relationship like that. No one deserves to live in fear or to be harmed by someone they're supposed to love. I sat there for a while, absorbing the news, and came to a profound realization. I didn't care about Sophie anymore. Not really. Her life, her choices, they were no longer my concern. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. It wasn't my job to feel anything about it. Neither anger nor pity, nor a desire for revenge. I felt absolutely nothing. That's when it hit me. I had truly moved on. I could hear about Sophie's life and feel completely indifferent. I won't pretend the road to recovery was smooth. It wasn't. Even after the divorce and hearing about Sophie's chaotic existence, it took time to rebuild my sense of self. You don't simply bounce back from that kind of betrayal. It leaves scars, deep, lasting ones. But those scars can heal, slowly but surely. I began to pick up the pieces of my life, one step at a time. I found a new apartment. Not fancy, but it was mine. I focused on work, reconnected with friends, and for the first time in ages, I concentrated on myself. I wasn't concerned about anyone else's expectations or needs. It was about me figuring out what I wanted from life. People would occasionally ask if I was ready to start dating again. Initially, I wasn't. The thought of opening my heart to someone new, of exposing myself to that kind of vulnerability, terrified me. But gradually, something began to shift. It wasn't a dramatic realization. It happened more subtly than that. I started meeting new people, going out more, and tentatively dipping my toes back into the waters of relationships. And yes, I met someone. Not in a whirlwind, love at first sight scenario, but through gradual connection with a woman named Emily, who I met through mutual friends. She's nothing like Sophie in all the best ways. Honest, kind, no games or hidden agendas. It's been a refreshing change. We're taking things slow. I'm not rushing into anything because I've learned that lesson the hard way. Yet for the first time in what feels like an eternity, I'm genuinely excited about the future. I can envision myself happy again, building something new, something real. Looking back, I realized that Sophie's betrayal, as devastating as it was, forced me to reevaluate my life and see things for what they truly are. Yes, it was hell, but in a way, it also set me free. I'm stronger now, more aware of who I am and what I want. The scars remain, but they no longer ache as they once did. They serve as reminders of what I've endured, of what I've overcome. I don't know what the future holds for me and Emily or for my life in general, but one thing is clear. I'm no longer afraid of it. I'm ready to move forward, to keep growing, to live a life that's truly mine. And that, more than anything, is what recovery looks like. It's not about forgetting the past or pretending the pain never happened. It's about embracing those experiences, learning from them, and emerging stronger on the other side.